They drained a pond on his own property. They walked the land around his house with dogs. They put drones up and they put aircraft up, and they still didn't find him. Days later, Joe Paychak's body was recovered from a pond on that same property. His truck had never left the driveway. His phone, his wallet, and his house keys were all still inside. The door was unlocked, and on the table there was a cup of coffee with the creamer standing next to it, the way a man leaves it when he's stepping outside for something that should take 4 minutes. The public reporting never establishes the one detail that decides this case: whether the pond he was found in is the pond his friend says had already been drained during the search. If they were different bodies of water, there's an ordinary explanation, and I'd take it. If they were the same one, then somebody drained the water on a man's own land, looked at what was underneath, decided he wasn't there, went looking somewhere else, and later brought him out of it. There may be an answer sitting in records that were never released. Draining doesn't necessarily expose every depression, every obstruction, or every layer of mud. Two people can use the same word about two different pieces of water. Conditions change between searches. Early statements are incomplete more often than people think. Any one of those makes the story unremarkable. None of them appears clearly enough in the public account to close the gap, and the gap is made worse by what was waiting inside the house. Men don't normally make coffee, walk away from the phone, the wallet, the keys, and the truck, and leave with no intention of coming back. Before you decide what happened to Joe Paychak, there are other scenes you need to see. In Northern California, a family drove out to a campsite in the forest and found the missing man's truck still there with its hood raised. His 2 dogs were at the camp. His cat was there too. His phone and his keys were reportedly still among his belongings. Searchers found possible tracks in a creek bed, and nobody could prove they were his. Ground teams worked the surrounding country, drones searched from above, aircraft joined the operation, and no confirmed route away from that campsite ever emerged. In Hawaii, a father and his 16-year-old son left their hotel at 7 in the morning. At 8:45, a stranger found the father's backpack near the route they'd planned to walk. His belongings were inside it. His car was still near the trailhead. Crews covered the coastline, the surrounding land, and the ocean for days, and neither the father nor the boy was found. No public witness ever established the moment either of them entered the water, which leaves 105 minutes of that morning almost completely unaccounted for. In Southern California, a mother drove into a mountain park on an afternoon when her daughter was waiting to be picked up and a hospital was expecting her for a night shift. She reached the park. She reached neither of the other two. 3 days later, her vehicle was found, and friends said her phone, her purse, her wallet, her identification, her passport, and cash were all still inside it. On the Big Sur coast, an avid hiker's car arrived at the hotel where he intended to stay, with his hiking equipment still in the vehicle, and the hotel never checked him in. And a man's car crossed most of a continent from Nebraska and stopped at Pensacola Beach with his phone, his identification, his wallet, his money, and his laptop, according to his family, all still inside. These are not disappearances where investigators were handed nothing. In several of them, almost everything survived. The vehicle survived. The phone survived. The keys, the animals, the backpack, the trailhead, the reservation, and the final digital record all survived. In some of them, the person was eventually recovered. What didn't survive is the transition. The small piece of time in which an ordinary day stopped making sense. A camper walks away from 3 animals. A father sets a backpack down during a morning outing with his son. A mother closes a car door knowing she has somewhere to be that evening. A hiker leaves behind the gear that was the entire reason for the trip. A man drives across a large part of the United States, reaches the ocean, and separates from nearly everything his family says he was carrying. None of those actions looks final while it's happening, and nobody standing nearby would know which detail was worth remembering. Nobody would know that the position of a set of keys might matter. Nobody would think a raised hood would end up on a missing person timeline. Nobody would memorize the exact minute a stranger left a parking lot, or imagine that a receipt from a park entrance would become one of the last reliable pieces of a person's day. Nobody looks at 2 dogs waiting beside a camp and understands that the person they're waiting for may never come back. That's where tonight's cases begin. Not with wilderness, not with the ocean, and not with a theory. With something more uncomfortable than any of those. The possibility that several of these people had no idea they were leaving for the last time. This is Echo 7. Most of these files come from 2024 through 2026, and most of them never traveled much further than sheriff's updates, local television, park notices, and search and rescue bulletins. They didn't become famous puzzles picked apart for decades. Some of them exist as a handful of press releases, a few statements from relatives, and a photograph circulated by a county agency. That makes them harder to sit with, not easier, because they're still shaped the way a missing person case actually looks when a family first realizes something is wrong. There's no polished narrative at the start. There's a car where it shouldn't be, a phone that's gone silent, an appointment missed by somebody who doesn't miss appointments, a dog still waiting at a camp, a relative trying to decide whether it's too early to worry. The unanswered part exists before anyone has a name for it. Some of the people in this file are still missing, others were found. Finding somebody brings a kind of closure that matters enormously, and it doesn't always explain the event. Sometimes a recovery just moves the question backwards. Instead of asking where a person is, investigators start asking why they were there, how they reached that point, why earlier searches missed them, and what took them off the route everybody expected. The location becomes known. The journey doesn't. Thomas Eric Campbell was 47 when he disappeared in September of 2024 near Patrick Creek in Del Norte County, California, close to the Oregon line. He'd been camping in heavy timber near Highway 199, where the road runs through steep ground, river corridors, and dense tree cover. He'd brought 2 dogs and a cat with him, which meant that when his family went looking, there should have been 4 living things around that campsite. They found 3. The camp was still standing. His Toyota pickup hadn't gone anywhere. The animals were still where he'd been staying. Nothing about the site suggested violence or a hurried attempt to pack up and leave. What stood out was the truck. The hood was up. That one detail hands you a complete and perfectly believable story before anyone searches a square foot. The vehicle develops a problem. Campbell opens the hood, realizes he can't fix whatever's wrong, and walks toward the road or the next camp to find help. He expects to be gone briefly, so the animals stay. Depending on how it went, leaving the phone and the rest of it makes sense too. That's a minor inconvenience that happens thousands of times a year and ends with somebody coming back an hour later with a set of cables. Campbell's version never reaches the second half. He also experienced occasional seizures, and investigators considered that a seizure followed by confusion could have taken him away from camp with no clear sense of direction. That's a second reasonable sequence, and it stacks neatly on the first. He leaves for an ordinary reason. Something medical happens afterward. The man who set out toward one place is now moving somewhere else entirely. It explains behavior nobody understood later. It still doesn't tell a search team which way to walk. Several boot prints were found in a nearby creek bed. For a moment, that looks like the thread you follow to the end. Then, authorities said they couldn't establish the prints were his. Somebody fishing could have left them, and other people had reasons to move through that ground. That uncertainty matters more than it first appears. If the tracks were Campbell's, the landscape recorded at least a fragment of his route. He reached the creek bed, moved through a particular area, and gave the search a starting bearing. If they belonged to somebody else, then searchers may never have had a single confirmed physical trace leading away from that campsite. Ground teams worked the forest. Drones went up. Helicopters and other aerial resources joined. Searchers covered the areas Campbell could naturally have reached. But search and rescue doesn't examine wilderness at arm's length, square foot by square foot. It runs probability. Roads, water, terrain, behavior, and reliable clues decide where limited people and limited daylight get spent. Campbell's case refused to produce a reliable direction. The animals are what make that absence hard to dismiss. One dog staying at a camp can mean almost anything. A dog might feel safe there. It might follow somebody a short distance and turn back. It might never register the moment a person walked away. 2 dogs and a cat still don't prove what Campbell intended, but all 3 staying gives the scene an unfinished quality. If he planned to walk any distance, does neither dog go with him? If a medical emergency happened close to camp, could one of them have known where he was? Did they watch him leave along the road, or did he go while they were sleeping? Did one of them follow him and come back? There's no way to ask them. They're witnesses without testimony. Later missing person records added more of what stayed behind. His phone, his driver's license, his keys, communication, identity, and transportation, all sitting around a campsite with 3 animals. One item couldn't be accounted for, a black powder revolver belonging to Campbell. That has to be handled carefully. A missing weapon changes the temperature of a disappearance very fast, and there's no public reason to treat it as evidence of violence. Nobody established he had it with him. It could have been misplaced, stored somewhere the family didn't know about, or completely unrelated. Still, it keeps the scene from freezing perfectly. Almost everything stayed. One object couldn't be found, and neither could Campbell. There were later possible sightings, and none of them restored a timeline. No witness could take investigators from that campsite to a confirmed second point and say he was definitely there, which leaves several explanations alive at once. The truck may have broken down, he may have had a seizure, he may have reached the road, he may have accepted a ride, he may have gone toward the creek. The prints may have been his, or they may have had nothing to do with him. Every one of those is ordinary on its own. Together they produce a search with no anchor after the campsite. And there's one more possibility that almost never survives in a missing person record, because it leaves no physical signature at all. A person changes their mind. Campbell may have set out toward one place and then turned because of a sound. Another person, a vehicle, the weather, an animal, or something that made perfect sense to him in that moment. Searchers reconstruct plans. People don't always follow plans. One small decision moves somebody outside the area everybody else will later expect them to be in. Eventually, the family had to deal with what was left. The dogs and the cat couldn't stay at a camp indefinitely. The truck could be removed. The phone and the keys could be collected. The site could be dismantled until that stretch of forest looked exactly the way it had before he arrived. The last known scene disappeared piece by piece. The missing interval didn't. A pickup with its hood raised still looks like the beginning of an action. Somebody opened it for a reason. Somebody expected something to happen next. What happened next to Thomas Eric Campbell has never been reconstructed clearly enough to close that gap. His animals at least had a known owner. 2 dogs found near Will Rogers State Beach in Los Angeles created a stranger problem because the human being at the center of the scene wasn't publicly known at all. On the 9th of July, 2026, Paulo Moreno encountered 2 dogs near the beach. They were clean and healthy, and they wore matching harnesses. They didn't look like animals that had spent weeks surviving alone, so Moreno did what almost anyone would do and took them to a veterinarian, expecting a microchip to turn all of this into an address and a phone number. Neither dog had one. Then another detail surfaced nearby. Moreno said a bag had been found in a women's restroom containing dog food, a swimsuit, and other personal belongings. Nothing publicly proved that bag belonged to whoever owned the dogs. Nothing established that the owner was a woman. Nothing showed that anybody connected to the animals had gone into the ocean. There's a very real possibility that 2 unrelated things simply ended up in the same general area. The dogs could have been deliberately abandoned while the bag belonged to a swimmer who forgot it. Proximity makes unrelated events look connected, especially once people know there's something unusual to explain. But nobody came back for the animals. Moreno contacted police. According to the account he later gave local television, an officer described the circumstances as unusual and said there was no missing person report from that beach matching what had been found. That reverses the normal logic of a missing person investigation. Usually the human being is the first known fact. A family calls because somebody failed to come home. A photograph starts circulating, and investigators go looking for the vehicle, the phone, the clothing, the bag, the last camera image. Here, the possible evidence appeared first. 2 cared for dogs, matching harnesses, food, a swimsuit, and personal belongings, and no confirmed person to attach any of it to. If the dogs were abandoned on purpose, whoever left them may be perfectly safe somewhere else. Cruelty doesn't require a puzzle. If the bag belonged to another visitor, The strongest apparent connection vanishes completely. Both of those are simple and entirely possible. But if the dogs, the food, and the belongings all came from the same person, the timeline gets much less comfortable, because something could have happened before anyone anywhere realized an absence had begun. People can be missing for hours before they're considered missing. Somebody traveling alone has nobody expecting a call that evening. Somebody living alone misses no appointment for a day. A visitor can be 1,000 miles from family. During that stretch, nothing looks like evidence, because nobody knows there's an event to investigate. The dogs are only dogs beside a beach. The bag is only a forgotten bag in a restroom. A stranger walks past both and sees nothing that belongs in a police report. Moreno tried to find someone who recognized the animals and looked for a path back to whoever had cared for them. No identity closed the story, which makes the dogs unusual witnesses. Somebody fed them, chose those matching harnesses, and brought them into the circumstances they were found in, and the animals can't say whether their owner walked toward the water, toward the parking area, into another vehicle, or simply left them deliberately. They can't say whether the bag mattered. They can't even confirm there's a missing person at the center of the scene. There may be a completely ordinary answer to what happened at Will Rogers State Beach. Until somebody connects those animals to the person who cared for them, the most basic question is still open. Not where did the owner go, who was the owner. On Oahu, the missing people were real, and the timeline was frighteningly short. On the 23rd of June, 2026, a 49-year-old father and his 16-year-old son left their hotel at around 7 in the morning. They were visiting from South Korea and planned to explore the Hanauma Bay Ridge and Rock Bridge area. At roughly 8:45, a passerby found a backpack near the route. The father's belongings were inside. His vehicle was located near the trailhead. Less than 2 hours after leaving a hotel, an ordinary vacation morning had already become a search operation. The obvious danger was the Pacific. The coastline around Hanauma Bay is unforgiving, and exposed rock next to moving water creates an accident that needs no complicated theory. Somebody steps toward the edge. A wave arrives, bigger than expected. Balance goes, and the second person reacts before there's time to think about it. It can happen in seconds. Crews treated the water seriously. Helicopters worked above the area, boats covered the ocean, divers searched below, land teams examined the coastline. Nearly 4 days passed without either of them being located. The sea remains the strongest explanation. Water doesn't hold a neat radius around a point of entry. Currents move people, weather changes conditions, and a recovery area expands by the hour. Failing to find somebody doesn't make an ocean accident unlikely or unusual. What stays unclear is the sequence before the water becomes the assumed answer. No public witness placed either man in the ocean. That leaves 105 minutes with almost no confirmed movement inside them. And the backpack becomes important because it records a separation before the men themselves disappear from the timeline. Why was it there? The simplest answer is convenience. He may not have wanted to carry a pack onto exposed rock and expected to pick it up on the way back. If that's what happened, the backpack isn't just an abandoned object. It's an expectation. He believed there was going to be a return trip. Other sequences are possible. The son may have gone ahead while the father stopped. One of them could already have been in trouble when the bag came off. They may have separated for several minutes and come back together. Nobody outside the pair knows. The version almost everyone imagines is immediate. One person is swept in, the other goes after him, and both are gone. It fits the geography perfectly, and it's still a reconstruction rather than a witnessed event. That difference matters, because without a confirmed entry point, the land stays part of the problem too. Did both men reach the most dangerous section? Were they together the whole time? Could one of them have gone another way? Was the backpack placed somewhere safe or dropped during an emergency? Everything important happens between a hotel door and the discovery of that bag. Less than 2 hours, and almost none of it accounted for. We tend to picture unsolved disappearances as the product of enormous missing periods, days or weeks in which nobody knows where somebody went. Oahu shows how little time it actually takes for a normal morning to become almost impossible to rebuild. The father and son leave a hotel. Less than 2 hours later, the backpack is separated from them. Search resources deploy quickly. Neither person is found. Their family knows their names, their voices, and the plans they'd made for the rest of the trip. They know things about how those two behaved together that never reached the public. In the American record, all of that reduces to a handful of nouns. A father, a 16-year-old boy, a backpack, a parked car, then a coastline. Angelica Brophy disappeared inside another normal day, except that her day had 2 deadlines in it before anyone knew those deadlines would matter. Brophy was 44, a mother of 2, and an emergency room nurse from Southern California. On the 6th of July, 2026, she dropped her daughter at summer camp. She was expected back later. A hospital expected her for a night shift. Those 2 obligations give investigators something they almost never have in wilderness cases: a hard boundary around normal behavior. A hiker can stay out longer than planned. Somebody on vacation can change their mind without telling anyone. A backpacker can decide to camp one more night. Brophy had 2 independent parts of her life expecting her on the same day. She was seen leaving Harrah's Resort, Southern California during the afternoon. A parking record placed her vehicle entering Palomar Mountain State Park at approximately 4:20. Nothing about entering the park is strange. The strangeness is entirely in what fails to happen afterward. By evening, her daughter was still waiting. She hadn't come home and she hadn't arrived for work. Her husband couldn't reach her and she was reported missing. 3 days later, her Hyundai Kona was found inside the park. Friends later said her phone, purse, wallet, identification, passport, and cash were all still in the vehicle. Those objects add weight to the scene. The timeline is heavier than any of them. 4:20 in the afternoon. A mother enters a mountain park. Hours later, a child and a hospital are independently waiting for the same person, and neither one sees her. Searchers covered roughly 1,800 acres. Dogs worked the terrain. Drones went up. Volunteers joined. Dive teams examined the water around Doane Pond. Investigators tried to pull useful location data from her phone, and no final movement ever emerged publicly that explained where she went after leaving the car. Her husband later used information from an older phone and an Apple Watch to focus attention toward the Doane Pond trailhead area. That information helped locate the car. It didn't locate Brophy. That distinction is one of the recurring problems in modern disappearances. Phones, watches, parking systems, and vehicle records create the impression that technology knows where people are. In reality, each system records itself. The parking system knows a vehicle entered. The watch knows what the watch recorded. The phone knows where a signal existed. None of them understands the thought that made a person take one path instead of another. A precise timestamp marks the beginning of the unknown without reducing it by a single minute. There are ordinary explanations here. A medical emergency, a fall, a wrong turn, an injury in ground that's hard to see from a maintained route. None of them requires a crime or anything that can't be explained. None of them removes the clock either. What did she expect to do when she entered that park? Was she taking a short walk before collecting her daughter? Did she intend to spend an hour alone? Was there a particular viewpoint she wanted to reach? Did she already know she wouldn't be returning to the evening waiting for her? That last possibility changes the meaning of the entire timeline. If she deliberately walked away from the evening her family understood, then 4:20 isn't an interruption at all. It's the beginning of a different plan. If she meant to keep those obligations, then something changed after the car came through the gate. Either way, the parking record supports 2 completely different stories. The fact is precise. Its meaning isn't. Joseph Aranda's car created a different contradiction because there appeared to be nothing stopping him from getting back in and driving it away. Aranda was 32 when his family last saw him in Victorville, California, on the 10th of July, 2025. The following day, his vehicle was found in the parking lot of Emmanuel Temple CME Church. His family later said the car had fuel and no known mechanical problem. The church wasn't a place they associated with his routine. All the windows were down. The keys were inside. His phone and his wallet weren't. That combination is difficult because the objects don't all point at the same intention. A phone and a wallet are what a person takes when they leave a vehicle. The keys are how that person comes back and drives away. There may be a very simple explanation. He could have had a second key. He may have intended to walk for a few minutes and seen no reason to lock up. Somebody else may have parked it. The open windows may be nothing more than the weather. Then time starts passing. Months later, his family said there had been no meaningful activity on his phone, his bank accounts, or his social media. Reported sightings failed to locate him. The longer that silence holds, the harder an ordinary voluntary disappearance is to picture. Because eventually, a living person needs logistics. Food, shelter, transport, money, communication, or somebody else willing to supply all of it. People absolutely do leave their families and start again somewhere. Doing it without producing a single trace visible to the people searching takes either planning or unusual circumstances. Did Aranda plan something like that? The visible condition of the car doesn't say. If he walked away by choice, why leave the keys? If something interrupted him suddenly, why is there nothing inside the car that explains the urgency? And if somebody else parked the vehicle, then the church lot may not be where he disappeared at all. It may just be where an object was left afterward. There's no public proof that happened. The fact that it can't be ruled out is the whole weakness of an abandoned vehicle as a final point. Investigators know where the car was found. That doesn't always mean they know where the person was last safe. Even the open windows refuse to settle into one meaning. They may be completely insignificant, or they may preserve the emotional scale of the stop. This will only take a minute. I'll be right back. Pawan Kumar Gairi's vehicle traveled a great deal further before the driver dropped out of the record. Gair was 29 and had completed a PhD in electrical engineering at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. In early March of 2026, his car started appearing a long way from Nebraska. It was reported in Tennessee, then in Florida, and on the 11th of March he spoke with his parents in Nepal and reportedly told them he was doing well. Then regular contact stopped. Lincoln police opened a missing person case after he failed to return home and missed an appointment. On the 27th of March, his car was located at Park East on Pensacola Beach, more than 1,000 miles from Lincoln. His family told local television that the vehicle still contained his wallet, his identification, his money, his phone, and his laptop. If that's accurate, the journey gets harder to read the closer you look at it. A long drive is hundreds of miles of opportunity to reconsider, hours in which a driver can turn around, stop, pick a different destination, or make a call. Whatever took Gaire south carried the car through multiple states, which makes the route look deliberate when you view it afterward. That's an illusion the map creates. We see a path and assume the endpoint explains it. Why Pensacola Beach? Why drive that far if there was no particular goal? But a destination is only a destination if the driver meant it to be one. The beach may have been the plan from the beginning. It may have been chosen a few hours earlier. He may have been driving with no fixed endpoint and stopped when he reached the coast. He may have been meeting somebody, or he may have wanted to see the Gulf. The route itself can't choose between those. The objects inside the vehicle make the final movement harder to explain. A phone holds the communications and the searches that would account for a trip. A laptop holds plans. Identification and money are what ordinary travel requires. If all of that stayed in the car, what did Gair expect to need after he closed the door? A 10-minute walk on a beach needs almost nothing. An intentional new life needs almost exactly the pile of things his family says he left behind. Pensacola Beach also creates a psychological endpoint because the geography appears to run out. Highway becomes parking area. Past that, there's sand, shoreline, and water. The image only feels symbolic because we already know the person disappeared, and investigators can't treat symbolism as evidence. People park at beaches every day. Still, once that car is sitting there without him, the geography becomes impossible to ignore. Did he walk toward the water? Did he move along the shore? Did he cross the lot and get into another vehicle? Was somebody expecting him? Was the car left in daylight or after dark? Every answer builds a different search. Nebraska, Tennessee, Florida, Pensacola Beach. The sequence gives you movement and no motive. Investigators could locate the car at the end of the trip. They could not locate Gair. And if nearly everything his family listed really was still inside, The hardest question isn't why he drove to Florida. It's whether he thought he was coming back to the car before he'd need any of it. Robert Cruz's vehicle reached exactly the destination everyone expected. Cruz didn't. He was 35 when he vanished in August of 2025 while traveling toward California's Big Sur coast. He intended to stay at Ragged Point Inn and hike in the area. His car was later found in the inn's parking lot. He never checked in. That's a disappearance with almost no distance in it. The vehicle completed the trip. The reservation was there. The building was there. Somewhere between parking and whatever he planned to do next, the expected sequence stopped. Cruz was an avid hiker, and his hiking equipment was reportedly still inside the vehicle. Big Sur supplies an accident scenario immediately. The coastline is steep. Cliffs drop toward the Pacific. Dense brush and ravines hide a person from roads and trails in a single step. One bad footfall can happen entirely outside anyone's line of sight, and a normal accident needs no larger explanation. The gear changes the timing. Why travel somewhere to hike and then leave the hiking equipment behind? One answer is obvious. He may not have started yet. He could have planned to check in first. He may have stepped away from the car only to look at the coastline, find a restroom, or walk to a viewpoint. The pack staying in the vehicle doesn't have to mean he'd abandoned the purpose of the trip. It may mean the disappearance happened before the trip properly began, which makes the parking area more important than the wilderness around it. What happens before a planned hike? A person gets out and stretches, looks around, checks a phone, walks toward a building, says 4 words to somebody, changes shoes, decides to look at the view first. None of that attracts attention. A man standing beside a car at a hotel isn't memorable. Only after he disappears does anybody ask who saw him. And by then, other guests have arrived and left. Employees have changed shifts. Cars have taken the same spaces. The people who may have seen him have no reason on earth to remember an ordinary stranger from several days ago. His family searched. Aircraft and drones joined the operation. Cruz stayed missing. Authorities indicated publicly that no obvious evidence of foul play had emerged, and there may be personal context known to investigators that makes one explanation far more likely than it looks from outside. That limitation matters in every case in this file. Families know about medical issues, emotional stress, private conversations, and behavior that may never be released. The absence of those details can make a case look far stranger to an audience than it does to the people working it. Even allowing for that, the visible sequence is unusual. Cruz traveled to the place he intended to reach. His car arrived. His gear arrived. The hotel never received him as a guest. Big Sur is enormous. The Pacific is enormous. And the unexplained part may begin in a parking lot small enough to cross in under a minute. Sunshine Borges disappeared from a route short enough that the scale of the search became part of the problem. Borges was 47 and lived in Santa Rosa. On the 1st of October, 2025, she drove toward Bodega Head on the Sonoma coast for what was believed to be a solo hike. The main loop out there is roughly 2 miles. For an ordinary visitor, that isn't wilderness in any dramatic sense. It's not a multi-day expedition. It's not a remote traverse. It's an outing that fits inside an afternoon. Her white Subaru was found in the parking area early the next morning. Borges wasn't. Heavy coastal fog complicated the first search. Fog does more than reduce visibility. It removes orientation. The landmarks that tell somebody where they are stop existing. The ocean becomes a sound rather than a direction, and a trail can feel far more isolated than it really is. Once conditions improved, everything went in. Ground teams on the trails, dogs, drones, aircraft along the coastline, boats, and marine units on the water. No confirmed trace of her emerged. A family member later said her phone last pinged near the trail around 6:30 that evening. And again, the technology makes the problem look smaller than it is. A phone area, a vehicle, a 2-mile route. How much uncertainty can possibly be left? A great deal, because the phone is not the person. If she had it with her at 6:30, the signal may genuinely be her location. If she dropped it, set it down, or became separated from it, the device becomes a false anchor. If it stopped because of water, damage, or battery, the last signal may record an event. If it stopped for another reason, It records nothing but electronics. Eventually, the organized search was suspended while authorities waited for information, telling them where to concentrate next. That's a hard phrase to hear after a search on a short loop. Where next? The vehicle is known. The trail is known. A final phone area is reportedly known. Land has been searched. Air has been searched. Water has been searched. And one unrecorded movement changes the entire geometry. Suppose she reached the cliffs. Then the Pacific is central. Suppose she turned inland before them. Then the ocean search may be largely irrelevant. Suppose she came back to the parking area and something happened afterward. Then the trail itself is a distraction. A vehicle is one of the strongest clues a search can produce because it gives you a center. It can also create false confidence. The person must be nearby. Usually, that's a reasonable assumption. Several of tonight's cases force the same uncomfortable question anyway. What if the strongest object only tells us where the person stopped using that object and not where the person stopped moving? Eric Davis's vehicle was found beside a landscape that looks impossible to hide in until you're standing inside it. Davis disappeared in May of 2026 after being seen around Goldfield and the Amargosa Valley area of Nevada. 2 days after his last confirmed sighting, his vehicle was found on Highway 127 near Shoshone, California. He wasn't inside it. He was reported to have cognitive and memory difficulties, which made disorientation an immediate concern. The explanation looks almost complete before the search begins. A vulnerable driver becomes confused, stops the car, gets out and can't find his way back. No crime required. Nothing unexplainable required. Except searchers still need one thing: a direction. Which side of the road did he leave from? Did he follow the pavement because it's easier to walk on? Did he move towards something he could see? Did he look for shade? Did he walk during the hottest part of the day or after the temperature dropped? A person experiencing confusion can behave exactly as predicted for 10 minutes and then make a decision nobody could have anticipated. A report surfaced that somebody resembling Davis may have been seen walking along the highway. Authorities couldn't confirm it. Unconfirmed sightings are among the most dangerous forms of hope in these cases. If the sighting is right, it can save an enormous amount of time. If it's wrong, it pulls resources toward the wrong ground and creates a false timeline that gets more convincing every time somebody repeats it. Picture the search planners working with that report. If that was Davis, what could he have reached afterward? What structures, roads, and terrain lie in that direction? How fast could he move? Now take the assumption away. If the witness saw somebody else, none of those calculations describe Davis at all. The search became extensive. 9 operational periods involved more than 170 personnel. Teams worked on foot and in off-road vehicles. Drones, aircraft, a helicopter, and canine teams were used. Investigators examined available cellular information. No public path emerged from that vehicle to Davis. The number of searchers creates another illusion. 170 people sounds like enough to find anybody. In reality, those people are spread across terrain, checking roads, drainages, structures, and ridges, working the places probability says a missing person might go. Desert seen from a car looks open. At ground level, it breaks into pockets of invisibility. A shallow wash hides somebody from the highway. A low rise blocks everything behind it. Rock and vegetation repeat across the whole landscape. Heat wrecks your sense of distance. A person can be a few hundred yards from a road and stay invisible to every vehicle passing. There's also another possibility. Davis may not have stayed there. A vulnerable person can accept a ride from somebody genuinely trying to help. A driver sees an older man walking in dangerous conditions, stops, and takes him somewhere safer. Minutes later, the missing person is far outside the area. Investigators will build around the abandoned car. If that helpful driver never sees the appeal, nobody knows the movement happened. There's no evidence it happened to Eric Davis. There's also no confirmed route showing he stayed near the car. Searchers had hundreds of eyes. What they never had was the decision he made after the vehicle stopped. Randall Bennett's car may have spent days inside an even stranger period, the time after a person has disappeared, but before anyone looking at the scene understands there's a disappearance at all. Bennett was 50. Authorities in Montana said he was last known to be in Bozeman in late September of 2025. His vehicle was later found at the Spanish Creek trailhead. By the time authorities appealed publicly for information, reports suggested the car had already been parked there for days. Nothing about a parked car at a trailhead is alarming. That's exactly where cars belong. It may be the most dangerous form of normality in wilderness cases. A crash creates urgency. A broken window draws attention. A door hanging open makes somebody stop. A properly parked car conceals an emergency simply by looking correct. Day 1 means hiking. Day 2 can mean backpacking. Even several days won't create concern if nobody checking that lot knows the driver's schedule. Which means people may have walked past Bennett's car while the best evidence in the case was still fresh. Somebody could have parked beside it. Somebody might have seen him changing his boots or talking to another person. A second vehicle may have been there. A hiker could have passed him and forgotten his face because there was no reason to remember it. Then the context changes. A photograph appears in local news. Police ask for information, and suddenly investigators need all of those ordinary moments recovered from memory. Was Bennett's vehicle already there when you arrived? Was anyone beside it? Did you see him leave? Was he carrying a pack? Was another vehicle waiting? Human memory isn't surveillance footage. When a stranger doesn't matter, the brain throws the detail away. By the time an alert tells a witness what to remember, the clothing is gone. The time has slid, and two different people have merged into one. The physical scene changes on the same schedule. Weather passes through. Other hikers cross the tracks. Vehicles arrive and leave. Tire marks multiply. Scent weakens. The car stays. The context decays around it. That's the opposite of how people imagine evidence. We picture clues being discovered over time. In some disappearances, the most useful clues are disappearing during the exact period when nobody yet knows to preserve them. The trailhead tells investigators where the road portion of Bennett's journey ended. It can't tell them when the emergency began. Jacoby Hale left behind the object that normally answers exactly that, his phone. Hale was 21 when he disappeared near Darrington, Washington on the 16th of May, 2026. Around 10 in the morning, he was at his grandparents' property on Gold Hill. He told relatives he planned to hike north and be back before dark. He knew the area. He'd spent years visiting that property and exploring the country around it. Experience matters because it changes both behavior and search assumptions. Somebody unfamiliar with terrain tends to stay close to roads. Somebody who knows it uses informal paths, shortcuts, and off-trail routes that make perfect sense only to him. His grandmother expected him back that evening to watch a movie and eat popcorn. There was supposed to be an evening. He wasn't packed for a night outside. His family said he carried a machete, a rain jacket, 1 granola bar, and 2 mandarin oranges. His cell phone stayed behind. Before the disappearance, that meant almost nothing. He knew the ground, he was leaving in daylight, and he expected to be home before dark. If service was unreliable up there, carrying the phone might not even have seemed useful. After the disappearance, the same choice becomes enormous. A cell phone provides tower connections, timestamps, movement records, searches, calls, and messages. Hale left behind the device most capable of describing the part of that day nobody else saw. Darkness arrived. He didn't. Search and rescue teams spent days working the surrounding mountains. Dogs were used, and family members said scent indications appeared along the old Mountain Loop Highway and later around a nearby cell tower. None of it developed into a continuous confirmed route. Scent evidence sounds more definitive than it is. Dogs do extraordinary work, and scent is affected by wind, weather, surfaces, contamination, and time. An indication focuses attention without drawing a clean line across a map. The family worried about ravines, remote ridges, the Sauk River, and abandoned mines. Each of those is a different search problem. A ravine hides somebody vertically. Water moves evidence. A mine creates an enclosed space invisible from the air. A ridge carries a person beyond the search radius faster than anyone expects. Then searchers noticed something small. Vegetation that appeared to have been cut with a blade. Hale was carrying a machete. In any other situation, nobody looks twice at a cut stem in the woods. Once the missing person is known to have walked in there with a blade, the same damaged plant acquires potential meaning. Nobody publicly established that Hale made it. Another hiker, a hunter, or a worker could have. It may have been there long before he disappeared. The clue matters because almost nothing else exists. A trail camera added another fragment. At roughly 10 minutes before 2 that afternoon, 2 unidentified people were captured in the wider area. There was never any public accusation that they were involved. His family wanted them identified because they might have seen him, which creates a strange problem of proximity. 2 people may have been moving through the same landscape while Hale was already missing. They may have passed him without understanding anything was wrong. They may have seen him and forgotten the details because he looked like any other person outdoors. They may never have come close. Or by 10 minutes before 2, he may already have been somewhere nobody expected. A phone could have eliminated some of those possibilities. One tower connection proves he reached a particular area. One recorded movement shifts the search. One message shows whether he was worried. Instead, the phone stayed behind, and that may be the most unsettling detail in the file, because he didn't lose it during an emergency. He left it before anything looked dangerous. The trip felt safe enough that he decided he wouldn't need it. He expected to be back before it got dark, and whatever changed that plan happened after he walked away. William Donovan left almost the opposite kind of evidence. He gave investigators a written indication of where he intended to go. Donovan was 65, an avid and experienced hiker from Massachusetts. He disappeared in New Hampshire's White Mountains in April of 2024. Nearly 2 weeks after he was last seen, his vehicle was located near Crawford Path. Inside were pieces of hiking equipment that would have been useful in the conditions. Then, investigators found a handwritten note at his home, suggesting he might hike Mount Jefferson and Mount Adams. A car, useful gear, a written plan, 2 named mountains. That's more directional information than most wilderness searches ever receive, and it still didn't lead to Donovan. A written plan feels powerful because it seems to reveal intention. But hikers change plans. Weather changes them. Trail conditions change them. Fatigue, snow, wind, water, visibility, and daylight can all turn an intended route into something else. Search teams worked ridgelines and routes around the nearby mountains. Dog teams covered trails, drones examined drainages, aircraft moved personnel into high terrain. Deep snow was still lying, water crossings were dangerous, and no Donovan appeared. Then hikers found equipment and a jacket in the dry river. The entire search shifted. That's what a real clue does. It doesn't simply add information, it changes probability. Before the jacket, searchers were working models built partly on guesses about a man's intentions. After the jacket, there was a physical object in a specific place, and the map began reorganizing around it. On the 13th of May, a team found Donovan roughly 400 feet upstream from the jacket. His body was beneath a large boulder in freezing water. The missing man had finally been located. The route had not. Officials considered the possibility that high winds or other adverse weather forced him down off the ridge. That's completely plausible. The White Mountains punish small errors and conditions change fast up there. But the explanation still has a missing decision inside it. At what point did he leave the route he originally intended? Did wind make the ridge impossible? Did visibility collapse? Did he descend deliberately because lower ground looked safer? Was he already injured? Did he enter the river trying to cross it, or did he reach the water only after a fall? The handwritten note is Donovan before conditions changed. The body beneath the boulder is the final known outcome. Between those 2 objects is the part investigators can't reconstruct. There's one more detail in the equipment left in the vehicle. If useful gear stayed behind, what did he believe the conditions would be when he started? Experienced hikers make mistakes, and they also make reasonable decisions based on information that changes later. The weather may have deteriorated beyond anything he expected. A short objective may have expanded. The gear in the car may not have looked necessary when the day began. Again, one object supports several stories. Finding Donovan ended the search for his location. It didn't recover the hours between the note and the river. Aliatzia Bulia's case created the same problem across a much longer period. Bulia was 26 and had traveled from St. Louis to Washington in November of 2025 for a nature trip. She was last publicly seen shopping in Port Angeles on the 17th of November. Her mother heard from her the following day. Then contact stopped. Bulia was reported missing, and several days later, her rented black Ford Bronco Sport was found at the Sol Duc trailhead in Olympic National Park. A rental car is a powerful object in an investigation because it exists inside records that are independent of the missing person. There's a company, a contract, and a vehicle tied to a specific renter. Once the Bronco turned up at Sol Duc, searchers had a defined starting region: a vehicle, a trailhead, a valley, known routes, water, terrain that could be divided into search sectors. Dogs searched, drones were used, ground teams worked the trails and the surrounding country, and technical teams searched along the river corridor. High winds and elevated water complicated parts of the operation. Television images of searches create a false certainty. You see dozens of people, aircraft, and dogs, and you imagine an area becoming completely known. Searchers understand how different the reality is. Bad weather makes the same piece of terrain effectively different from one day to the next. High water blocks routes. Wind limits aircraft. Rain changes tracks and scent. Visibility collapses without warning, and search teams have to protect themselves. A rescuer injured in dangerous terrain creates a second emergency inside the first one. Eventually, the operation shifted toward responding to specific clues rather than maintaining the same broad intensity. Weeks passed, then months. Bulia's body was eventually recovered in the Sol Duc Valley, near an off-trail area south of the main trailhead. The recovery solved the most basic question: where is she? It immediately created another one. How did she reach that location? Was it part of her plan? Did she leave a maintained route intentionally? Did weather change her direction? Did she become lost? How close had earlier teams come to the place where she was eventually found? That last question comes up again and again, and people outside search and rescue misunderstand it more than anything else in this field. Searched does not mean empty. It means a particular effort was made under particular conditions with particular visibility and probability. A person can be hidden below a small drop that's invisible from above. Vegetation covers clothing. Snow conceals objects. Water changes where something rests. Human eyes get tired. Dogs work conditions, not miracles. A body can be painfully close to where teams walked and stay unseen after a recovery that feels impossible because the location is now known. Once you know exactly where something is, every route toward it looks obvious. Before the recovery, that same spot is one tiny area among thousands capable of hiding a person. Bulia was found. The unknown part didn't disappear. It moved backwards, into the route between a rental vehicle and the place where she was recovered. Then there's Joe Pachak, the man whose coffee was still on the table. Pachak was 75 and lived in Bluff, Utah. He was an artist, a Marine veteran, and an experienced wilderness guide who had spent decades in desert country. Around Thanksgiving of 2025, people close to him realized his routine had broken. He missed a planned meeting, and he missed holiday gatherings. Friends went to his house and found his truck in the driveway, his phone, his wallet, and his keys inside, and the door unlocked. On the table sat a cup of coffee with the creamer beside it. Someone close to him described morning coffee as part of his routine. That cup may be the most unsettling object in this entire file, because it measures time differently from everything else. A parked vehicle can look normal for days. A backpack can lie beside a trail for hours. Coffee belongs to a short window. It's prepared to be drunk before it changes. The cup doesn't give an exact time, and it doesn't prove he poured it immediately before leaving. What it does is compress the scene. The house doesn't feel abandoned, it feels paused. What takes a man out of his own morning routine without the objects he normally needs? The answer may be trivial. He steps outside to inspect something. He remembers a task. He hears a sound. Somebody arrives. He walks a short distance expecting to be back. Those ordinary possibilities are exactly what make the scene disturbing. The final decision may have been too small to prepare for. Searchers worked the area. A helicopter was used. Drones flew. Scent dogs searched. Friends and volunteers joined. And Pachak knew the landscape around his home extremely well, which is double-edged again. Experience reduces the risk of some mistakes while making a person more confident about moving through ground others would avoid. No immediate trace appeared. Then, a person close to him said a pond on the property had been drained during the search. Days later, his remains were recovered from a pond on the property. The public version refuses to become clean at exactly that point. The reporting doesn't establish whether those two references described the same water. It doesn't explain how complete the earlier draining or examination was. It doesn't say whether levels changed or what conditions searchers were working in. There may be a completely ordinary explanation inside that missing information. The friend in the sheriff's office may have been talking about different places. Drained may not mean empty. Mud, terrain, or vegetation may have interfered with detection. Conditions may have changed before the recovery. All of those are reasonable. The question exists because the public account doesn't choose between them. If it was the same pond, how was he missed? If it wasn't, why has the distinction never been made clear? Was the original assumption about when he entered the water wrong? Did an earlier search create confidence in a place that had never actually been cleared? And every version eventually returns to the kitchen. The truck outside, the phone, the wallet, the house keys, the unlocked door, the coffee. How long did he expect to be away from that cup? Was he walking across his own property for something that would take 5 minutes? Did he even understand that he was leaving the house for anything significant? The recovery site wasn't 50 miles into inaccessible country. It was on his own land. His body came back into the record. The last ordinary minute did not. James Roger Carroll presents almost the reverse image. Pachak left nearly everything behind. Carroll carried his equipment into the wilderness, and during the detailed phase of the search, no backpack, jacket, or other clear piece of gear was publicly identified as his. Carroll was 77 and lived in Eureka, California. In July of 2026, he entered the Russian wilderness in Siskiyou County. Friends described him as experienced, self-sufficient, and comfortable, traveling away from established trails. He knew the area. He told a friend about plans involving the Duck Lakes and High Lake, an off-trail destination where he intended to fish. His vehicle stayed at the trailhead. He was expected back several days later. He didn't return. His friends became concerned not simply because he was late, but because he had a habit they trusted. He checked in consistently, roughly every 24 hours. Routine can be one of the earliest forms of missing person evidence. A person doesn't have to send a message saying something is wrong. Sometimes danger is recognized because the normal message never arrives. Carroll's silence mattered because it was unusual for Carroll. Search and rescue teams moved into the Russian wilderness. Dozens of personnel from multiple agencies worked the terrain. Established trails were covered, drainages were searched, teams went into off-trail areas, and some rescuers camped in the backcountry rather than lose hours traveling in and out. Aircraft assisted. No Carroll. And more unusually, no backpack, no jacket, no obvious piece of equipment publicly connected to him. That second absence changes the search because equipment multiplies the number of things rescuers can find. A person is one target, a backpack is another. A jacket, a bottle, fishing gear, a piece of fabric, a campsite, or a reflective surface each create another chance for human presence to interrupt a natural landscape. Searchers didn't publicly find any of it. The wilderness had hidden not only Carroll, but the ordinary evidence that an equipped person had moved through it. There are reasonable explanations for that. Experienced backpackers keep their equipment with them. A pack doesn't have to be dropped during an emergency. Dense terrain hides gear as easily as it hides a person, and the search area is enormous compared with the size of a jacket. Still, the absence removes every intermediate clue. Eventually, the search entered a distinctly modern phase. Aerial images of the wilderness were analyzed by software looking for visual anomalies, colors, shapes, or objects that didn't belong in the surrounding terrain. Approximately 15 locations were flagged for closer examination. Not 15 confirmed clues. 15 places where something looked different enough to deserve another look. A shape too straight. A patch of unusual color. Something that could be fabric. something that could be equipment, old trash, light reflecting off rock, a natural object seen at the wrong angle, nothing at all. What makes that stage remarkable isn't the software, it's everything that had already happened before the software became useful. Human beings had walked that terrain, aircraft had passed overhead, professional rescuers had studied routes and drainages, friends had described Carol's habits, search models had already tried to predict where an experienced 77-year-old backpacker would go. Then the remaining uncertainty was reduced to pixels. Find the places where nature looks slightly wrong. The software doesn't know James Carroll. It doesn't know that somebody is waiting for his call or what a missed check-in means to the people who trusted that habit. It sees difference. 15 places that may deserve human attention. One of them could contain the first physical trace of him. All 15 could be meaningless. And even finding his backpack wouldn't necessarily solve the disappearance. It would create another point. Why is the pack there? Did he remove it deliberately? Was it separated from him in an accident? Did he continue without it? Is he nearby? Could the object have been in that wilderness before his trip? Searches often advance this way, not directly toward an answer, but toward a newer question. That pattern repeats through almost every file tonight. Campbell's campsite is found, and the unanswered part begins outside the campsite. Aranda's car is found, and it begins beyond the church lot. Gare's vehicle appears on Pensacola Beach, and it begins beyond the driver's door. Cruz's car reaches the hotel, and the gap opens before the check-in. Brophy's vehicle is located, and suddenly the mountain becomes the problem. Donovan's body is recovered, and the missing route becomes the question. Bulia is found, and the question moves backwards through the forest. Pachak is recovered on his own property, and the earlier search itself becomes the thing people want explained. Evidence doesn't always close a disappearance. Sometimes it only pushes the dark further away. That's particularly uncomfortable now because modern life records so much. Phones connect to towers, cars appear on cameras, parking systems log entries, watches record movement, hotels keep reservations, rental vehicles create records, and bank cards leave timestamps. Aircraft photograph wilderness, door cameras record sidewalks. People generate data constantly without thinking about it. We've become remarkably good at locating objects. The weakness appears at the transition, the second when the human being stops moving with the object. A phone records where the phone was. A car records where the driving ended. A parking system records when a vehicle entered. A watch records whatever stayed attached to the watch. We assume the person stays attached to those devices until evidence says otherwise, and usually that assumption is correct. Then a case like one of these exposes how fragile it is. A car can be moved by somebody else. A phone can be left on a table. A watch can stop. A person can get into another vehicle. A camera can record somebody entering a place without covering the exit. A device can sit exactly where investigators expect the person to be while the person is somewhere else entirely. A surveillance camera records someone crossing one small rectangle of pavement. 10 feet beyond the frame, the story becomes reconstruction, and the missing distance may be tiny. Campbell walks away from an engine. Aranda leaves the keys in a working car. Gare closes a door at Pensacola Beach. Cruz leaves his hiking gear behind because he expects to come back for it. Brophy chooses one path inside a mountain park. Borjas walks into fog on a short coastal route. Davis steps away from a desert highway. Bennett's car sits at a trailhead while strangers walk past it. Hale leaves his phone at the house because he knows the woods. A father sets a backpack down on a morning outing in Hawaii. Donovan changes direction as the weather turns on a ridge. Bulia moves off a maintained route. Pachak stands up from his morning coffee. Carol turns toward another lake. None of those actions has to feel final, and that may be the most frightening idea in this entire file. The last normal moment doesn't look final while it's happening. There's no warning attached to it. Nobody is told which decision will become the one investigators spend months trying to rebuild. Nobody hears a voice telling them to take the phone, keep the keys, bring the dogs, stay back from the water, refuse the ride, or skip the shortcut. Life gives no warning because almost every one of those actions is harmless almost every time it happens, which is what makes hindsight so cruel. Afterwards, ordinary decisions start looking loaded with meaning. Why was the hood up? Why were the windows down? Why did that drive end on that beach? Why leave hiking gear in a vehicle you drove 5 hours to park? Why enter a mountain park on an afternoon when your daughter and your hospital are both expecting you? How does somebody vanish from a 2-mile loop that gets searched from land, air, and water? Was that really Davis on the highway? How many people walked past Bennett's car before anybody understood it mattered? Why leave a phone behind before walking into the mountains? Why did a father separate from his backpack inside 2 hours of a vacation morning? What moved Donovan off the route in his own handwriting? Where is Carol's gear? Those questions are seductive because they make every object look deliberate. Not every object is. Sometimes keys are forgotten. Sometimes a phone is left because there's no signal anyway. Sometimes gear stays in a car because the plan was a 10-minute walk. Sometimes a route changes because weather changed. Sometimes a person makes one completely normal decision at exactly the wrong moment. The answers may all be ordinary. A seizure is ordinary medicine. Fog is ordinary weather. A wave is ordinary physics. A wrong turn is ordinary human error. An injury can happen without witnesses. A stranger offering a ride can be an act of simple kindness. The extraordinary part may only be that nobody saw which ordinary thing happened. Once that moment is gone, the empty space starts accepting versions. An accident. A medical crisis. Water. Weather. A deliberate departure. Another person. A vehicle nobody remembers seeing. An abandoned mine. A route searchers never considered. A location that had already been searched. A sighting that couldn't be confirmed. Someone standing just outside a trail camera's frame. And when none of it can be proved, people start reaching for explanations that are much stranger. Unknown forces, patterns connecting places hundreds of miles apart. The idea that certain landscapes take people. Something following them, something waiting past the point where the phone stopped working. There's no evidence in these files establishing one hidden cause, and they don't need one to stay disturbing. Uncertainty on its own is enough. The evidence doesn't have to prove the strangest theory for people to imagine it. It only has to leave enough empty space that the theory can't be killed. That's how this grows. 10 minutes without a confirmed position gives searchers a circle around a point. An hour gives them terrain. Another vehicle gives them roads. Water gives them currents. Days add weather, degraded scent, fading memory, and surveillance footage that may already have been overwritten. Weeks change landscapes. Months change vegetation. Seasons change water levels and snow cover. Eventually, the last known point stops functioning as a point at all. It becomes several competing stories. Take a car found at a trailhead. One version says the person walked into wilderness. Another says the person came back to the parking area and got into somebody else's vehicle. A third says the missing person never parked that car there in the first place. Same object, 3 different worlds. A phone left in a vehicle has the same problem. It can suggest a short absence, an intentional decision to disconnect, or nothing more dramatic than forgetting it on the seat. The object is certain, its meaning isn't. And here's where these cases stop being stories about wilderness and become something closer to home. Several of these people may have been surprisingly close to safety when the critical moment arrived. Near the car, near a hotel, near a road, on a short tourist route, on family property, on their own land. Remote mountains already look dangerous. A church parking lot does not. A hotel parking lot does not. A 2-mile coastal trail does not. Your grandparents' property does not. Your own yard does not. Your kitchen does not. There's a hidden period inside many of these disappearances that gets almost no attention, because while it's happening, nobody knows it exists. The person is already missing, and the rest of the world hasn't caught up. No search is running. Nobody is preserving camera footage. Nobody is checking plates. Nobody is asking hikers to remember a stranger. Nobody looks twice at the same vehicle sitting in a trailhead lot. People are driving home, eating dinner and finishing work, walking past places that may already contain evidence. That interval can last minutes. It can last days. The first hours matter because physical evidence is freshest, memory is strongest, and electronic records may still be available. But nobody can preserve evidence before anyone knows there's a case. Bennett's car may have sat inside that interval for days. Gare's family was thousands of miles away while his vehicle crossed the United States. If something truly happened to the owner of those dogs at Will Rogers State Beach, the clues may have appeared before anybody understood there was a person to report missing. The father and son on Oahu were the exception. Their backpack triggered concern within 2 hours. They still weren't found, which destroys another comforting assumption, the one that says if only the search had started sooner, everything would have been different. Early recognition improves the odds. It doesn't guarantee that the missing person is anywhere near where the search model predicts. Search and rescue is not a wall of people erasing every square foot from a map. It's probability. Where would this person normally go? How fast could they move? Would an injured person go down? Would a confused person follow a road? Would an experienced hiker stay on the trail or leave it deliberately? Would somebody escaping bad weather seek lower ground? How far can a person get without overnight equipment before dark? Every answer sends resources somewhere, and every one of those models is built on what human beings usually do. A missing person only has to make one decision the model doesn't expect. One shortcut, one turn, one attempt to cross water, one ride accepted, one place to rest where the trail can't see them, one movement toward a sound or a light. The search map changes and nobody knows it changed. That may be the simplest explanation behind some disappearances that later feel impossible. The person didn't do anything impossible. They made one normal decision that moved them outside the story everybody else reconstructed afterwards. Maybe that happened in one of these cases. Maybe in several. Maybe the truth is something none of us has considered, because the detail that would reveal it disappeared with the person. Carroll's 15 anomalies reduce that whole problem to something almost surreal. 15 small places on images of wilderness, and behind every one of them the same set of possibilities. Rock, old trash, fabric, reflected light, a backpack, nothing. Suppose searchers check all 15 and none of them belongs to him. What happens then? Another image? Another drainage? Another season? Another year? At what point does a landscape stop being searched and simply become the place where somebody remains missing? Searches don't end because families stop caring. They end because resources, probability, and safety reach their limits. Professional teams can't occupy wilderness forever. Aircraft can't fly indefinitely. Searchers go back to their jobs. Weather closes areas. The operation changes from constant physical movement into an investigation waiting for information. The land stays exactly where it was. That transition is brutal for families, because during an active search, every hour contains movement. Teams report in, maps get updated, vehicles arrive, helicopters are audible overhead. Then, slowly, the activity decreases, and a case that ran like an emergency becomes a file. The silence gets larger. That change doesn't mean the missing person moved further away. It only means investigators no longer know where to spend the next hour. Now go back to the first image tonight. Not the mountains, not the helicopters, not the dogs or the drones, the coffee. Joe Pachak's cup may tell investigators almost nothing forensically. It can't establish the second he left the house, explain the pond, identify another person, or reveal what he was thinking. But it captures expectation better than anything else in these files. A man prepared an ordinary part of his morning because he had no reason to believe the morning wouldn't continue. That's different from a packed suitcase, a farewell message, or an emptied house. Coffee is temporary. You make it for the version of yourself that will still be there a few minutes from now. Campbell's animals hold the same expectation in another form. Somebody was supposed to come back and feed them. Brophy's daughter waiting for a pickup holds it. Somebody was supposed to arrive. Cruz's unused reservation holds it. The journey was supposed to have another step. Hale's plan to be home before dark holds it. The day already had an ending written into it. Carroll's missed check-in holds it. His friends knew what ordinary silence looked like, and this was not it. The people and the objects around them all kept behaving as though there would be a later. Only the missing person crossed into whatever happened next, which is why the phrase disappeared without a trace is wrong for these cases. There were traces everywhere. Sometimes almost everything survived. The car, the wallet, the keys, the dogs and the cat, the hiking gear, the backpack, the route, the reservation and the final digital signal. In some of them, even the body was eventually found. Everything survived except the moment that would make the rest of the story make sense. And that moment may have lasted seconds. One decision, one movement past a camera, one step off a path, one vehicle door opening, one wave arriving at the wrong time, one seizure, one fall, one stranger slowing down, one choice to go a little further before turning back. Afterwards, investigators inherit objects that can't describe intention. The keys can't say why they were left. The dogs can't explain how long they expected to wait. The backpack can't explain why it was set down where it was found. The phone can't say whether its owner thought the separation would last 5 minutes or forever. The coffee can't explain what made a man stand up. And that's where the genuinely difficult possibility begins. Not that these people knew they were disappearing, that some of them believed the exact opposite. Campbell may have expected to close the hood and feed his animals that evening. The father on Oahu may have expected to pick up his backpack on the walk back. Brophy may have expected to leave the park and collect her daughter. Cruz may have expected to return to his car, take out his gear and check into the hotel. Hale may have expected to be home that night for a movie. Pachak may have expected his coffee to still be warm. If even one of those is true, then there was a final moment when a person was still living inside the ordinary version of their day, while the next few minutes were already moving towards something nobody else would ever reconstruct. And the distance required is almost nothing. A few steps from a vehicle, one turn in a trail, the far side of a parking lot, a short walk across private land, 10 feet past a camera frame, close enough that nobody would think to say goodbye. That's much harder to dismiss than the image of a person walking knowingly into a vast wilderness. Most of you will never cross the Russian wilderness alone or stand on an exposed ridge in winter. Almost everyone has left a phone behind for a short walk. Almost everyone has walked away from a car without taking everything out of it. Almost everyone has said they'd be back soon and never once considered that the sentence could end up as evidence. We expect danger to announce itself. A storm, a scream, a broken window, a threatening stranger, something visibly wrong. These files suggest something else. Sometimes the scene stays completely ordinary for everyone except the person who never comes back. A vehicle stays parked. A dog waits. A hotel holds the reservation. A child watches the clock. Coffee gets cold. Then, hours later, somebody works out that the ordinary scene is now the last known scene, and every harmless detail on it changes at once. The open window becomes suspicious. The raised hood becomes important. The abandoned backpack becomes a timestamp. The forgotten phone becomes a missing route. The coffee becomes a clock nobody knows how to read. And investigators start working backwards, trying to find which ordinary object was the last one still connected to the person. Which may be why these cases are so hard to close emotionally, even when a likely explanation exists. An accident can explain a death without explaining the route. Water can explain a disappearance without showing the moment of entry. A seizure can explain confusion without telling anyone which direction the person walked. A fall can explain where a body ended up without revealing why the person was there. The cause and the unanswered part can exist at the same time. Nothing outside the natural world has to be involved. There only has to be one missing minute that nobody can reconstruct. And sometimes 1 minute is enough to keep every other possibility alive. Someone else was there. The person got into a vehicle. They left deliberately. They became confused. They followed something. They turned somewhere searchers never considered. They were closer than anyone realized. They were further away before the search even began. They were inside an area that had already been searched. They were never in the search area at all. Every version survives until evidence removes it, and in several of tonight's files, the evidence hasn't removed enough. That's where viewers start filling the remaining space themselves. One person sees an accident. Another sees a voluntary disappearance. Another sees a criminal encounter. Somebody else looks at the search failures and starts wondering whether the landscape itself is part of the pattern. People will argue about those possibilities because the public record can't choose between them. Joe Paycheck was found. William Donovan was found. Aliatia Bulia was found. Those recoveries matter enormously. But knowing where a person ended doesn't tell you what they believed they were doing when the last normal moment happened. Campbell hasn't come back to his animals. Hale hasn't come back for the evening his grandmother was waiting through. Cruz never completed the simple act of checking into a building his car had already reached. A father and son vanished inside less than 2 hours of a vacation morning. Somewhere in every one of those files, the evidence stops describing a person and starts describing only what the person left behind. That's the boundary. Before it, we know something. After it, we reconstruct. And if you want the most disturbing detail from tonight, it may not be the pond or the abandoned car or the empty campsite or 15 anomalies in a set of aerial images. It may be that almost none of the last ordinary objects look frightening on their own. Keys inside a car don't look frightening. A backpack beside a trail doesn't look frightening. 2 dogs waiting at a camp don't look frightening. A phone left on a table doesn't look frightening. A cup of coffee doesn't look frightening. Until the owner never comes back. Then the same objects become the edge of the known world, and somewhere past them is a minute that belonged to one person only, and whatever happened inside it was enough to separate them from every normal thing waiting for their return. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe a medical event. Maybe water, weather, another person, or a decision no search model predicted. Maybe the explanation is so ordinary that if we ever learned it, every strange detail would fall into place at once. Until that happens, the objects stay exactly where the story left them. The car reaches the destination. The reservation goes unused. The dogs wait. The child waits. The phone stays silent. The coffee goes cold. And the person who was supposed to come back becomes the only thing on that scene that nothing can explain.